The chaos leaders feel around them often isn't accidental. The table really is shifting, and most leaders are navigating all this noise without ever really having been prepared for what it looks like. Trial by fire, thrown into the deep end, faking it until they make it. It's all real life right now. Alana Cheeks-Lomax and I bring our elder millennial passion and perspective to this exact conversation. So let's dive in. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Motivation and That. I'm Natalie, your host, and this is where we take hot mess to high potential. Today, I am joined by a former Pittsburgh loving person who has now migrated, not in our city anymore, but fantastically still connected to the heart of how our network connected us together. So former podcast guest Jim was able, when we got done, he goes, "Oh, there's someone that I think you should talk to." And those are my favorite references. We chatted. We were like, yes, this is going to be a fantastic conversation. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Alana Cheeks-Lomax. She is the co-founder and CEO of Untold Impact, a strategy consulting firm dedicated to helping brands forge authentic connections with multicultural communities and empowering them to thrive in today's competitive marketplace. She's also the former global head of inclusion and diversity at Cash App and a diversity executive at Microsoft, and has built DEI programs from the ground up and is a trusted advisor to executives. And what presence to be in, because those are some heavy rooms to be sitting in, especially at this point in time in our society and all those great things. And now to kind of see you launching out there to take this further. And I think it's the beauty of consulting, right? Is that you're not necessarily under the thumb of someone in those high positions. You can be a little bit more challenging. So Alana, tell us a little bit about you. Like, how the heck did you get to this industry and where you are, and why does it speak to you?
Yeah, thank you so much, Natalie, for the intro. Really excited to be here. It's interesting as you started off talking about like Pittsburgh adjacent. I really feel like a lot of my interests and the things that I have decided to do and pursue came from my time at Pittsburgh as an undergraduate at Carnegie Mellon. One of our slogans, or one of the slogans of Andrew Carnegie, was "My heart is in the work," and that's something that's really embedded in you as a student there. And for me, I am always focused on mission-driven impact. Like, how are we making the world a better place? How are we solving the really, really hard problems? And I think throughout my career, I've always tried to tackle the hard problem. So started off in healthcare, was very focused on health equity, health access, and that eventually led me to the people space, where I was thinking, well, why aren't companies thinking about access and equity and making sure that everyone has the ability to climb the ladder and be successful, which is how I got into the diversity, equity, inclusion space. And after doing that for many years in tech, saw other problems that were happening, especially in tech, but realized that there were a lot of brands who were also not thinking about how to build authenticity with consumers. And I think we're in a really interesting point in time in our society where we have a lot of these challenges coming together, right? We see lots of generational shifts. We see where our economy's heading. We see conversations around technology, AI. And I think we're in a very interesting place right now of how we think about the future and what the future looks like for consumers, what it looks like for employees, what it looks like for the workforce. So, my career has not been a straight line, but it's always been rooted in impact. And I'm just trying to make sure people get what they need. And right now with my company, we're trying to help brands understand how to tap in and do it in the right way, because the world is shifting and it's shifting fast.
Yeah. And not only through this, I mean, this is an incredible broad topic, right? So we're in the midst of this really huge clash of ideals. We've got disruptions. We've got this drive for the buzzword psychological safety, which is, I'm growing to hate that word, not the premise, but the word.
Yeah, it's
uh, you know,
overused.
right. The
Hmm.
rollback, the conscious rollback of a lot of places of DEI. We've got a really stagnant, declining marketplace, declining morale. And so we're not going to be able to touch on it here. And I failed to mention at the intro, you also have a podcast. So
Yeah.
when we get done here, we definitely want to have people note that you also have the Office Hours Black Girl podcast. We'll talk a little bit about that as we get going. But if we scratch the surface and get people interested, you can hear more from Alana over on that pod as well. But Talk to us a little bit about your experience right now, like
Uh-huh.
consciously in this moment, entering into boardrooms and executive tables. What are you seeing as the new or emerging dynamic that we are encountering with these leadership teams?
Yeah, I actually, Natalie, leaders are trying to figure it out. Like they are overwhelmed. As much as we all are overwhelmed, they are as well because it's hard being a leader in general. It's hard being a CEO, it's hard being a C-suite, it's hard, managing teams and, making sure that people are excited about what they're doing and getting projects across the finish line. But then you add on top of that innovation and technology. And then you add on top of that what's happening in this administration. And then you add on top of that worldviews. Like people are really overwhelmed. And I find that a lot of leaders just don't know what to do. They're afraid of making mistakes. They're afraid of tackling the wrong things. And they are also getting burnt out because every which way they look, there's something that needs to be addressed. And I think that's a very unique space. I think prior to 2020, leadership was hard, but I think the past 6 years has just been like this fire that we've seen across leadership, no matter what industry you're in, if you're in academia, tech, healthcare, like whatever. I think it's just we've been inundated with a lot. And I think leaders are trying to figure it out, just like many of us are.
Well, and you've mentioned, and it's one of my favorite words, authenticity and being
Hmm.
authentic. And I think what we're seeing with some leaders is a crisis of who are they at their
Yeah.
authentic self? Because to your point, we led a certain way for a long time,
Hmm.
and now there is no calmness in the world around us. And I think it's challenging people's perspective of themselves and even
Yeah.
other people around them. What are you seeing as people going, "Is this really who I am?" Like, are there are there things that leaders in the rooms that you're in are starting to question about themselves?
Yeah, I actually was having this conversation with a leader that I'm working with recently because this person's a younger leader. And I also think there's generational differences. But as a leader, we were talking about all the things that are on his plate, right? So it's like you're managing a company, you have a C-suite that you're leading. We were talking about return to office, return to work. This leader actually has, small children at home. We were talking about what employees are asking for. And he was just having a moment where he was like, I'm struggling. And I had to remind him, you got to stay grounded in who you are right now. And you got to stay grounded in the values that you founded this company on and the values that you hold true to heart. And I think when you're in what can feel chaotic, we tend to start second guessing ourselves or questioning ourselves, right? I know I've done this when things seem really hectic around me. I don't know what I'm doing, but we really do know what we're doing. But we have to remind ourselves we have to remind ourselves what's important, but also we have to say to ourselves, if we need help, get support, right? Find a coach, find someone that you can, bounce ideas off of. But I've had to remind this person to stay grounded because right now the environment is so chaotic, but some of that is by design. But also too, as a leader, you can't solve everything. And I think that's the challenge leaders have. They want to solve a lot, but some of the things that are happening um, don't don't get solved overnight, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Who do you see leaving the table right now? So I listen to that and I'm
Mm.
like, "Oh, man, if that doesn't change, they're gonna intentionally or unintentionally find themselves not at the table anymore." A break of some nature, maybe, of their own choosing or, some other, process. But who is leaving? Because it's not historically just retirees at this point. We have exodus going from other spots, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think there's a lot of people leaving the table. We see the headlines or the lack of headlines around Black women leaving the table. There's over 600,000 Black women. I actually think it's more. I think it's probably close to a million, but the data is not being tracked correctly who have left the proverbial table. I think people are leaving the table because they're checked out, right? So as I talked about COVID, we've had really unprecedented times in the workforce over the course of 6 years, right? And people are just burnt out. So I see a lot of people just checking out from the table and just saying, you know what, I'm going to collect my paycheck and just move on. But the one leader that I see leaving most from the table is actually the people leaders, like people function HR. I see a lot of HR leaders saying, I'm good. It's almost like there's too much to fix and they're deciding to go independent or completely take time off. And I think that function has had a really challenging time over the last 6 years. And we see a big exodus right now from the people function.
Yeah, so I want to definitely dive into that a little bit,
Yeah.
pivot from the plan, but it gets me thinking, right? What role has had its title changed more than the chief HR? We've had chief people officer,
Chief people.
chief
Yeah.
well-being, chief,
Hmm.
and so it's almost like the identity of what that role does has been a little lost. And honestly, I'm thinking about it and I'm like, well, is that the person that handles the training and the empowerment and the build, or is that the person mostly for hiring, retention, retirement? So what even is that role anymore? And I'm assuming a little bit of that plays into why no one, why we're not seeing a lot of people entering that space, but also why we're seeing people doing that whole wash my hands. I need to get out of this for my own good.
Yeah, I think the role has changed a lot, Natalie, over the past 10, 15 years. And I think in the past couple of years, we've seen it change a lot. To your point, we're talking about, we always knew it as like a chief human resource officer. And a lot of that work might have been rooted in compliance or, risk management from a people perspective or from an HR perspective. And now we're seeing more organizations focusing on wellness and training and development and purpose and all of these terms that are lumped up into what we would call the people space. I think what's really interesting is that even with all the changes that we're seeing and the additional, what's the word I'm looking for? The additional responsibilities of this person, it's still grounded in people. And at the end of the day, I always say the most important function, I personally think the most important function is the HR people function. Because if you don't have a workforce, then you don't have a company, you don't have a product, you don't have anything. But I think we're seeing a lot more pressure being placed to really make sure people are good, employees are good, et cetera. But it has evolved because there's a need that's there. Right now, we're sitting in a workforce that has 4 generations. That's very unique, right? Everyone has different ideas and thoughts about how work should be, how they should get paid, what their employer should be doing, how their employer should be saying something versus not saying something. We're also in a space right now where people have very different ideas around the future of work and what that looks like. And, it's all grounded in this human experience. But for a very long time, HR wasn't that human experience function. It was just, like I said, these compliance risk things. But now it's morphed in, if you don't have the right people in place, if you don't have the right training, resources, money, support, people will get burnt out and they'll move on.
And I don't think, ironically, we give probably the HR world enough credit. One of my best friends at the VA, and I say best friends like professionally, I called him more than anyone else,
Yeah.
was, my employee labor rep because I was navigating, employee situations I had never been trained on. And I was like,
Hmm.
what am I allowed to say? What am I not
Yeah.
allowed to say? Like, I
Yeah.
don't want to get anyone in trouble, but this isn't all right. And, so they were, appropriately coaching in the right way, but then also having to identify people to support staff when
Hmm.
necessary. And then on top of that, they're trying to run investigations of their own right. And I'm like, wow, no one been trained for this because they're all pulled 15 different ways.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things that make a good human resources department,
A
but
lot of things.
I think we've parsed them out a little bit and then we've overwhelmed them too. And one of the elements being this whole piece of, if you touched on it, employees think they know best sometimes. And it causes some conflict on now having to navigate not just doing work, but dealing with a lot of opinions
Mhm.
that are coming up. How do we, and I'm hoping you've got at least a starting point on this, given everything that you've navigated, how do we start to talk about the employee's appropriate role in the workplace? How much are we entertaining these opinions versus going, we have a job to do,
Yeah.
and I don't have 5 hours in my day to debate the return to office stance?
Yeah. That's a great question, Natalie. I don't think anyone's posed this question to me. See, I have a very I don't radical is not the right word. I am very like my thoughts of how the workforce should be set up. I don't think everyone would agree with me, but I actually think at the end of the day, your people are your most important asset, right? Like that is the overhead, that is your biggest cost. And I feel like if Alana and Natalie enter an organization and we're not happy, it's not working for us. We know productivity wise, it's going to go down. We know retention is going to be really hard. So I feel like employees should be listening more to their employees around what they want and build workforces around them. And I think where the rubber's meeting or the road right now is what I mentioned before, there's different generations in the workforce. So boomers and Gen X are used to something very different than Gen Z, Gen Alpha that's coming up, and millennials, right? There's this idea right now among younger generations, they're not trying to work forever. They're okay with 9 to 5 at 5:01. Don't call, don't text. That's just not what they want to do. And that's totally fine. But I don't think the workforce has caught up with the needs of these older, or excuse me, younger generations. And I think they're not always listening to them. And at the same time, it can be hard as well because organizations are constantly changing their minds, right? I think about what we experienced during COVID. Everyone was like, remote work. We're making this work. We're making this happen. Everyone was making, a lot of companies were making record profits and they were like, yes, this is innovation. We don't need to be sitting in the same place. Now, a couple of years later, everyone's mandating people to get back in the office. And as an employee, you're like, wait a second, 2.5 years ago, you told me this was the future. And now I got to get back in my car, deal with traffic, pay for transportation, whatever it may be. And now you're demanding I get back into the office. Well, that's not what you said before, right? So I think those are the things that make it hard for employees. And really, if your employees are not trying to do certain things, that's why we do pulse surveys and we figure out, what's important for people. I think you got to be listening to them as well.
Well, and as I listen to you say that, I think of things. I'm of the strong component. I like the idea of logging out and not being reachable. But then
Yeah.
I think about my expectations as a consumer, right?
Hmm.
And I go, oh, I had a disaster happen in my home last weekend. I want to be able to talk to an insurance agent at 10 o'clock at night and find
Yeah.
out what's going on.
Yeah.
And so it's like we are applying expectations in an unbalanced way, right? We know
Hmm.
what we want as the consumer, but we may not be willing to answer it
Hmm.
as the professional or talk about what are those solutions? What does it look like if we did 4-day work weeks and, certain setups, would that make people more available at different times? How does the healthcare space work when, you've got a huge night shift population that may need treatment at night, or maybe we don't? Like, are there innovative discussions that you have seen start to trickle in
Hmm.
about this future of work conversation where it's it's like status quo is not going to function for the next 5 years?
Yeah. I think it really depends on, oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead,
I was
Natalie.
just going to say, what are there any crazy off the wall ideas that you've been hearing or start to get floated around?
I think it really depends on the organization and just really the willingness of leaders to be innovative and what that looks like, right? There are some standard practices I think that people have adopted that most people expect from their organization, whether it's, a wellness benefit or, a day or two off a quarter to volunteer, outside of like the standard benefits and kind of how we think about the future of work. I think when we talk about the future of work, there's the benefits side of it. And then the other part of future of work is around time and how people are using their time. I read an article about a company one time that instead of giving people stipends for the traditional wellness, they were giving people stipends for things that made a difference in their life. So you could use your money for like personal chef or house cleaner, like things to help you really save time and be efficient in your life. And people were like, we love this. We don't necessarily want to spend 500 on a gym, but if someone can come to my house once a week and I can use that 500 for that, done, right? Like that makes a difference in my life. So I think we will continue to see that. Um, but I think on the other hand, when we talk about the future of work, lots of conversations about 4-day work week. Most of us work more than 40 hours in 4 days if we actually like really add up our time. So we're like, oh, taking a Friday off or every other week doesn't feel so crazy. I mean, there are lots of countries globally who have actually already started to utilize this and their productivity hasn't gone down. I think if we're going to start retaining people, especially younger generations, we're going to need to be thinking about compensation and what's important for them. Do we give people more sabbaticals? Do we give them an opportunity to work in other places and kind of like like work in other places and experience other cultures? I think there's a lot of things that can be done. But unfortunately, I think what we're seeing right now is that AI is taking up a lot of costs and money and the innovation has slowed down because we're investing in this technology so much right now.
We're gonna get into AI,
Yeah.
believe me. It is I have found a way to put it in every one of my episodes
Yeah.
lately for
Yeah.
sure. But I have to touch on compensation because you brought it up. And as you were talking, it made me think. I listened to a congressional hearing a couple weeks ago with some healthcare CEOs. And I'm the jerk that went online and found out what those CEOs make in their salary because a
A
lot of
lot.
it is publicly posted on
A
their
lot of money.
990s.
Yeah.
And even if it's not, you can find, the for-profits. And the one was touting, oh, well, we opened a daycare at our hospital because the nurses couldn't find, and the staff couldn't find caretakers. And I'm like, but they couldn't find or they couldn't afford.
Mhm.
And it's like, there's a moment where, oh, great idea. They're right there. You can go see your kids if you want to. But I also want to be like, if you took a 10% salary cut and dispersed that along your staff could actually afford probably, I don't know, a
Childcare.
nanny a couple times a week that came to
Mhm.
the house or something, and childcare and all this. Why are leaders, and
Mhm.
maybe this is generational,
Yeah.
so against taking cuts to disperse and remove the wealth gap that we are seeing in major industries right now? And I just know healthcare because I live in it. And I know a
Yeah.
starting wage is $14 for a certain role that could
Yeah.
kill a patient.
Natalie, oh my god, if I had the answer for this, I think, it's so some days it's so infuriating to me because the capitalism is like the level of capitalism we're at right now is just like I feel like it's really killing us. So when you hear like you said, the CEO is making and these CEOs are making a lot of there are some people who are taking home compensation packages of like 20, 30, 40 million dollars,
Mhm.
and then they're laying off 10,000, 15, 20. I'm like, wait a second, right? And I don't think that I think we have gotten used to, and I think we've made it okay for these senior level executives to get away with this because it's so normalized, right? It's not like there's one outlier of a CEO that's making 30 million and then every other CEO is making $1 million, a half a million. It's the norm, right? So it's like, well, this is what you get when you get to C-suite. Now, you and I also know, Natalie, too, that some of these people that as they climb the C-suite aren't the smartest people, aren't the best
Mhm.
people, but
Mhm.
they are just compensated very well because they're in these lanes. But I think as a leader, this comes down to like almost an individual decision, right? I think we've seen examples. I think it was Ed Bastain, who's the CEO of Delta. I think during the pandemic, he took a huge pay cut so that Delta didn't have to lay off anybody. Like that was a decision. I want to assume that's the decision he made, but I'm sure with this team and the board, they figured out the numbers. But that was something he publicly shared. He said, "I'm not taking an increase, or I took a cut, so we didn't have to furlough anyone on our staff, and we can make it happen." And I'm like, okay, if Ed can do that, other people can do that. But I think we've just gotten to this place of greed that is
Mhm.
just it's so bad. So to your point, there are people who are still making 10, 14, $15 an hour and other people who are just making so much. And we have just normalized this wealth gap in a way that feels sometimes it just feels irreversible. Like it's just so big. And I also think as part of that, we have also normalized people just making lots and lots of money because we've lost a lot of collectivism and a lot of community. So everyone's like, let me just hoard as many resources that I can because there's nothing else that's supporting me or my community. So people are like, let me just make all the money. So even if you're not a CEO making $30 million a year, you're an individual worker who's just like, money, 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 because the system is not helping me any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, and I know we sometimes have justified those big paychecks and they're like, "Oh, well, they're taking on the majority of risk for the organization and they could be fired if something goes wrong." And I hate to break it to folks, they're going to fire 10 other people before their head ends up on the chopping block.
Yeah.
Things are built in that way. And sure, if they donate to charity, but what if you didn't even have to donate to the charities because the charities were able to be funded from a different pathway? Like the looking at the root cause piece, I think is gone missing. And there's a powerful
Yeah.
dynamic of that big table that sits there. And the question of what do you really do to earn that check? And
The,
it's
It's
It's really
astounding.
hard
It's
having
really hard.
sat in those rooms sometimes, and I'm like, I don't even know if I deserve this
Yeah, it's
paycheck,
hard. And
you
even
know?
if they get fired, their severance package is
Mhm.
going to set them up for life for the next 10, 15. Even if they do get fired, they're fine. They're not hurting these CEOs if they
Mhm.
lose their job in a year or two, you know?
Yeah. Well, and we mentioned, working more than 40 hours. And certainly a lot of these folks are working more than 40 hours
Mhm.
when you get into those seats. Their assistants also are.
Mhm.
Their staff have probably ingested that as an expectation of everyone under that chain also become someone that can answer emails at any hour of the day as we've gone forward. And it's funny because if you look back before there was email, I remember my dad running a hospital and he was home at 5 p.m. almost every day,
Mhm.
unless there was a board meeting and then he
Yeah.
stayed late. And so it's like we've reset our expectations in a non-realistic way and
Yeah.
then made it a norm. And there's a part of the generational piece that I think is coming into play, which is
Mhm.
people going, why the heck is it the
Why?
norm?
Yeah.
If 40 hours a week is the expectation, how come the whispers are actually it's 55?
Yeah.
If you make certain amount, it's going to be 55. I- Is anyone challenging that right now
Yeah.
beyond that generational component? Are there people that are actually saying, no, we need balance again and really living it?
Yeah, I think it's definitely younger generations because they're like, you don't pay us for all of this, you know? They're like, we're not getting paid for all of this. Do you think conversations I'm having with people too, just being a millennial, being an older millennial, I have conversations with my generational cohort, and many people are talking about how, we were raised for a world that actually doesn't exist anymore. And we did certain things, like we went to college, we got certifications, went to grad school, but we're still at this space of it's hard to buy a home. It's hard to save for retirement. It's like if you want kids, you talked about childcare earlier, how expensive that is. And I think what I'm starting to see, especially now where where we're going through all these layoffs, that people are starting to uncouple their identity from their job, which I think is very refreshing that it's not just our titles, but we are all human beings who have hobbies and families and things that we want out of life. And I think that's the change that's coming that allows us to think differently about how we show up to work. Because at the end of the day, it is a job, right? It is a job that serves a purpose to pay bills and do the things we need to do. So yeah, I hope these conversations keep happening because I think it's time. And I think go back to what we were saying earlier about generationally. I think what we saw too for so long from as you talk about these CEOs making all this money and the boomer generation too, is they grew up in the 80s of Reaganomics and Gordon Gekko, and you just hoard, hoard, hoard. That's just not what we see as valuable. Like this past week, they had the Met Gala in New York, and like Jeff Bezos was on the committee, and people were like, we're not supporting a billionaire who can literally solve world problems with a fraction of his like less than 1%. He could solve some stuff and he's just hoarding, and I don't think people want that anymore. We don't want to support that.
No, and I think it actually, and it's curious because I don't know if the folks that that we're doing this with realize it, but I even think of the shows that we watch, right, where they're touting this wealth, and you kind of just watch and you're like, "Show me the train wreck."
Yeah.
It's like it's not. It doesn't make me want to be like that. It's
No.
almost like I can't believe there are people who think like this, and I think it should be a wake up call for some folks, but to dive further into the generational piece, I want to talk
Mhm.
about boards for a second because I did
Okay.
an article the other day. I mentioned it before we started recording that showed that for the top, I think Fortune 500, the average age of a board member is
Uh-huh.
66.
Uh-huh.
And in many cases, these board members actually get paid because if they're for profit tech, any of those kind of things. Then you look at executive management, their average age, a little lower. It's like 57. It's like you age out of exec management, and then you go sit on the cushy board jobs, do that. And then their workforce is younger. They're in their 40s, late 40s to 30s in the most part. And so it makes me think like, what the heck does someone in their late 60s understand? And this is Congress too. So let me just point out it happens in all
Yeah.
industries, right?
I was gonna say it's everywhere.
Actually understand about what someone today in today's
Mhm.
world um, grasps as their real problems and the real things they're doing. Is there any effort to bring younger people onto those boards at this point? Or are they still relying on, you don't have enough experience, you don't
Mhm.
understand, you'll get here when the time is right?
Yeah, yeah. Well, let me start off by saying I want to be on one of those paid boards one day, Natalie. I am
You
not
and me
there
both.
yet because it is very lucrative for all those who know the paid boards, but obviously, it comes with a lot of responsibility as well. But I do sit on other boards, like nonprofit boards, and I am seeing a lot more people my age getting involved in that. I think there's this idea of what like philanthropy looks like and volunteering looks like for these organizations, that you don't necessarily have to be independently wealthy to support, a nonprofit or a board or help fundraise. So I do think more people are getting involved. But I think to go back to your broader question, as we talk about like this idea of leadership and who's in control, I do think we're seeing it right now, right? Like we're seeing younger people wanting to have a seat at the table and be a part of decision making. And you reference Congress, and this has always been politics is one of my Achilles heel because I get so frustrated when people are literally dying in office. They're in their 70s, 80s, and they've served for many years. Thank you for your service, but it is time for some new blood, some new energy, some new thoughts and ideas. And we're just seeing this like push and pull and this fighting for power among old guard and new guard. And, I think that's the workforce too. People are wanting different things, and some folks are just not willing to let go. And I was reading, I think it was Michelle Obama who was talking about her podcast a couple of weeks ago, that she was saying that older people just like, she's like, one of the disservices we've done is we haven't given older people, and I'm not sure if I'm using the right language, but older people like something to do to make
Hmm.
them feel important post them leaving. And I think she was referencing politics of, okay, thank you so much. You've done what we need you to do, but they're used to being important. They're used to feeling important, but what's their role when they decide to take a step back? And I don't think we have solved that. Which is why I think we have people who want to be in power as long as they can, or they're retired and they come out of retirement. The famous example I talk about is Bob Iger, who led Disney for years. He retired and then all of a sudden he was back. And it was like, Bob, but like, you probably don't need to come back, right? Disney clearly is in trouble if they're bringing Bob back, but it's also like, are there other leaders that could be probably, So, but I think the shift is here. People are wanting different.
Well, and it makes you question, Bob, when did you set up right and what did you not? That
Yeah.
it didn't work when you left. That's the biggest challenge to a leader is,
Yeah.
did you build the systems? They don't need you anymore.
Yep.
Right. Work your way out of a job. Well, and it's funny you mention, giving the folks that are retiring something to retire to. And I think of everyone that I know that have retired, and the number one thing they say is, I'm going to go be grandpa or grandma. And
Yeah.
then I think about how many of us who they would
Or
be grandpa and grandma for didn't have kids.
didn't
And
have
I'm like,
kids.
oh, okay.
They
So
they
it's a,
need something else to do.
and as you mentioned, like massive tech generational boom. And I'm
Mhm.
like, sure, there are people that are in their 70s that want to learn new tech. I'm sure there are, but there's also a lot that I have no interest in
Mhm.
doing that. So the hobbies and even anything that could replace that seems to have like, that's unknown. So let me
Yeah.
stay with what I know. I have to ask what the heck the feel is around Gen X, because I feel like I don't understand Gen X in the workforce.
Yeah.
We've tagged boomers for so long.
Mhm.
I'm a millennial, so I definitely know where I sit. I can point out a Gen Alpha, Gen Z.
Mhm.
I don't know who the heck the Gen X are and what are they filling? Where are they at in the
Yeah.
workforce? What do we need to look for? How do we help them?
Oh my gosh. I don't know if they know who they are either. It's like, yeah, because when you talk about the workforce, it's so interesting because Gen X, they were taught by boomers, right? But if we think about the generations, I'm biased in saying this, but I do think millennials is probably the most innovative generation in modern time just because of what we lived through. Like we are the analog and digital. We saw so much in our lifetime that we remember rotary phones, and before there was the internet, but then we also were the generation that grew up with it, had access to it, picked it up very quickly. So I feel like we have a very different perspective on technology, but I also think we move a little quicker. And I feel like with Gen X, they obviously are next after baby boomers, but there are sometimes I wonder if they got enough from boomers in order to really lead when it comes to the next generation. And I don't know if I hear enough from them. I don't know. I just feel like it's either boomers or millennials. I'm like,
Hmm.
who is talking and representing for the Gen X? Because every other generation is making noise, but I'm not sure where they are at. I don't know. I'm not sure if I'm answering the question.
No, you are. I mean, it's the same thing that I had, and I had to wonder if it plays into a little bit of the damn dynamic of
Hmm.
boomers not wanting to leave at this point
Yeah.
because maybe there's not enough trust. The millennials had enough time, or they're so different in their approach. Like like where's the bridge the gap kind of moment coming in,
Yeah.
and I think Gen X put their head down and did the work,
Hmm.
and that was what was asked, and got us through certain pieces and things, and by the way, it's no shade at anyone or any
Yeah. We
ageism,
love the Gen X.
but by any means, but it does kind of bring out this, if we're going to disrupt things, who
Hmm.
is best set to disrupt what pieces?
I think
And
millennials. I think
I'm
it's
tired. I
us.
don't want to disrupt
I
anymore.
know we are. We're tired. We were called lazy. We were like, you're buying too many lattes and avocado toast. That's why you can't do this. And you guys don't. I think we are tired as a generation because we've also been through like a million existential crises since we were like 12. So we're just like, when are we going to get a break as a generation?
Yeah, and and you and I are in the same boat, right? We've left corporate world, we're on our own. I hear a lot of millennials doing this, which
Hmm.
also makes me wonder if we're going to be, continuing to see lagging in corporate environments, Gen boomers, maybe some Gen X, and then all of a sudden there's this wave of, right, all these stand up little innovation groups, consulting, all this kind of stuff that are the millennials now at this point. And we don't want to work for the man. We're like
Yeah.
tired. We're like, let us figure this out ourselves because we've been the innovative group. But what are there certain industries that are really seeing this kind of millennial exodus and saying we can do it better without this corporate structure? And I
Yeah.
want to call out, you mentioned, the Black women leaving the
Hmm.
workforce,
Hmm.
and where are they going? What are they potentially doing? What are the opportunities that we now have to
Hmm.
build space for folks that are like, I'm not doing it the way that it's always been done?
Yeah, I think, I really think people kind of deciding to leave is agnostic of industry. I feel like I talk to people, whether they're women of color, men, all different backgrounds, and people are just kind of tired. I think they're tired of the rigmarole, but also they were taught one formula was the recipe for success. And I think the last few years people are like, ooh, that's not what I'm getting right now. So I do think we're gonna continue to see an influx of people becoming entrepreneurs, but I think also even within companies like entrepreneurs. I think there's two big gaps. I'm starting to see them, but I think they're going to get highlighted very soon. We're going to have real big gaps around upskilling and reskilling, especially with AI, because we're not seeing a lot of companies just training people and how to use this technology in the right way and helping people reskill and retool so that they are not just totally pushed to the side because of this new technology. And then I also think because so many people are leaving corporate America, who's coming up behind them, right? Like Gen X, I mean, like boomers retire, and then you have Gen X are the leaders, and millennials continue to leave the workforce. And then Gen Z is like, deuces, we're not trying to be in corporate for 40 years. Like, who's the next wave of talent? And I don't think there's no solve for this. I just think it's a part of this shift that we're seeing that I don't think anyone anticipated. And we got to see how this all shakes out.
Well, and I think it'll be really interesting to see which industry falters kind of
Uh-huh.
first, and not for the reason that we just saw Spirit, right, shut down.
Uh-huh.
So not because jet fuel went up, but because people literally won't do it anymore.
Yeah.
And I see it starting in healthcare. We see this huge breakout of direct practice medicine where it's cash
Mm-hmm.
only. You pay $50 a month. You can call your doc whenever, and the docs still aren't overwhelmed. They're like, this is still better than having to go into a hospital and round at 6 in the morning and be there,
Really.
for super long hours because they have
Hmm.
relationships and that's
Yeah.
what they wanted. So it's the shift in values. So, it will be interesting if those grow and the nurses go, not coming in here anymore. I'm going to go work for the direct care person
Uh-huh.
and work in my neighborhood and do certain things that look different. How we even maintain any sense of what the historic framework has
models
really
look
been.
like. Yeah,
Right.
yeah, mhm.
Because AI can't replace us in
It
some of these
can't
industries.
replace humans. As much as they're trying to tell us, Natalie, I'm like, "No." I'm like,
Oh,
this it's one big marketing campaign. It's
yeah.
literally a really good marketing campaign because 'cause I'm like, "This is not this is not what this technology should be used for."
Well, and I've never seen something move at this rate with, I can't wait. This is awesome. Let me buy it to, oh my god, you're posting another thing that clearly was written with Claude. Like, come on.
Mhm.
Like it has been like this massive, I love this, to we really are going to talk about how we actually use this because it's
Yeah,
making us look more stupid.
yeah,
So, what are you, I know you mentioned you just got off a conversation very AI
yeah.
driven. I want to hear your thoughts on AI in the current state and what the heck is happening with it.
Yeah. So the reason why I mentioned it's a big marketing scheme, this is for the Pittsburgh folks, University of Pittsburgh, Carnegie Mellon, like e-learning has been around since like the 50s. Like this is not a new technology. Obviously the technology has gotten better and smarter, but the way that we see people talking about it and branding it is like it just showed up a year ago. So this has always been happening. I think what we're seeing is a really big marketing play. And I think there's a lot of companies that are jumping on the AI bandwagon because they made poor financial decisions during the pandemic and they overhired, they took out loans they couldn't afford. So now they have a cash flow problem. And again, what's your biggest overhead? It's people. So they're like, oh, we're going to lay off part of our workforce, but laying off part of their workforce just helps them get cash flow to invest in artificial intelligence. And we're already seeing data that's coming out that's saying these companies are not any more efficient with these tools and the technology. And I just think we're in a space where we're just continuing to push it, push it, push it. But there are a lot of organizations that are doing it for the sake of doing it. But I'm not sure if they're asking the right questions of like what problems it's solving or really how you use it and enable it to actually be more efficient. Now, on the other side of the coin, the problem with AI, I feel like right now, is that we're also not having the other conversations, which is around the data centers that are being placed
Mhm.
in communities all around the country. We're not having the conversations about what this is doing to the labor market, right? How so many people are unemployed, the reskilling, as I've been talking about, and the upskilling that will be needed if this is truly something that's here to stay. How do we make sure that people understand it? I was chatting with a colleague that runs a nonprofit in the UK, and he was telling me in the UK, the government has mandated that people get trained on artificial intelligence and reskilled around this. This is something the workforce has to tackle. And I'm like, I wish we had that here in the US because these companies are just more than willing to just lay folks off. So I think there's got to be a more balanced conversation. I'm all for technology, I'm all for innovation, but I'm for responsible technology and innovation. And right now, it just doesn't feel responsible and it's creating a real big divide. And if we continue to grow in the direction we're going in, I feel like there's just going to be a real underclass of people. And when I even think about that, I'm like, that makes no sense to me too. Because I'm like, if everyone's out of a job, who's paying for your technology that you're trying to build with AI?
Mhm.
It doesn't really make a lot of sense to me.
Well, and I mean, talk about a timely piece when we're recording this. Just the other day, the National Endowment for Humanities lawsuit kind of came out and was
Hmm.
determined that no, it was completely incorrectly done with so many elements. And one of them was being how they scanned the contracts and the
Mm,
terms they used and how it was applied. And even though there was a human behind running that piece, it just goes to show the massive risk organizations are taking on
yeah.
when they just kind of willy nilly toss people out there and go figure this out. And by the way, get it done by tomorrow at 5 o'clock. And the easiest way is let me pop it into a reader, have it look for certain things, spit it all back out at me. Meanwhile, you're now training a system with proprietary information, potentially, depending what you've pulled up and started to use.
Yeah.
And you don't even know if you're looking for the right things.
Hmm.
So, it takes the right people with the right tool and the right information to even start to get to that data set piece. So, what are some of the, and Jim Jordan, when we talked, was
Hmm.
great at this. And he goes, I learned I didn't know how to delegate because I was saying something, and AI has taught me that how people interpreted it, it probably was not correct.
Yeah.
What are some of the things that we should be conscious of,
Yeah.
especially if we're in a leadership role and we're like, I need this for some extent.
Hmm.
How do I leverage it appropriately and ethically?
Yeah.
And, what are practical resources for it?
Yeah, I think this is a great question because I do think a lot of organizations are putting themselves at risk and they don't even know. They're uploading people data, sensitive information
Hmm.
to these systems. And of course, we know that if, in the background, these tools are learning from all the data that you're giving it. So stuff is now out in the ethos. For me, I have found that, because I do use Claude, I do
Hmm.
use, I did use OpenAI at one or ChatGPT at one point. I use it for efficiency things like help me understand how to be more efficient or create a schedule for myself for like my podcast or how do I think about blocking my time? Here are my constraints. I don't use AI to I use it to help streamline my life more so than being a thought partner. Like in some ways it can let me say this, it can be a thought partner and I have used it in that way, but I have to check it and correct it. And I'm like, let me make sure this is actually accurate. Cause I do think a lot of people are like chugging and chugging and just copying and pasting and assuming it's like Bible. But we have to be thoughtful. And I think as leaders, there's ways to ask, to prompt it to say, okay, can you help me rewrite this a little bit and make it sound a little bit more formal? Or, can you help me be more like scan my calendar? Where are there places I can save time so I can spend time with my family? I think those are the ways we need to think about AI because the other challenge with this technology is the people that are creating it don't represent all of us, right? So you have a
Hmm.
lot of, you know, technical people in the background who don't have experience in healthcare and have not had an experience as a proposal writer, so there's little nuances that make it more challenging. And I think until we get to that space, it's still going to be biased and not going to be helping all of us.
I think if anyone wants a really good challenge, is take something you already know the answer to, that you're an expert in, that you
Yeah.
have mastered, and plug that prompt into whatever system you use and see if it actually gets it right. Because there's
Yeah.
been times, I mean, and I'm not a coder, I'll get stuck on something on a website build or whatever, and
Uh-huh.
it will send me down some really long path. And I find the workaround was just that I built an extra field and cloned something. And I'm like, this is a workaround I could have used. It didn't even think of
I
that,
didn't even think about
so
that. Yeah.
right, you can't lose your creativity along the way, and I know I use it. I am open about using Claude as well for, when I do my articles, and I say, if you source something, I want the source. You're only giving me sources. I want the link to the source. I want the library where the source sits, otherwise the hallucination piece definitely comes up. So
Mhm.
I think as managers and workers, let's just assume, right, that our staff are probably using something, Copilot if that's in their thing. And the new question might be, show me your sources or show me
Yeah.
the steps or show me the prompts you used because I want to make sure you interpreted this the same way that I did because that's where we see a lot of, I think, some of those breakdowns.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
So, as we head towards kind of the end of the conversation here, we haven't had a chance to touch on, which I think is one of the things maybe getting a little mixed up with AI, the piece of what makes a high quality team versus a high
Mm.
performing team, right? Because AI might be helping us crank out numbers and hit volumes we've never seen before. So we're high performing, but to the point what we just talked about, is it actually high quality? And are the outcomes what we really want to look at? And
Yeah.
what do you see when, especially when you're trying to rebalance someone, right? Who's focused on an output number and having to say, okay, but are you making a high quality group or a high quality goal?
Yeah, I think I'm glad that we're talking about this, the difference between quality and performance, because I do think that, if I think about performance of something in the framework of AI, I think about last, right? It's like, okay, like it's performance, it's pushing out stuff, but to your point
Hmm.
about quality, it might not be right, right? Yes, we've created multiple agents and they're spitting out reports and they were able to do a task that might take one person 5 hours, this task in 30 minutes. So yes, high performance, we've checked that. But when it comes to quality, it's not accurate. And I think when we think about teams and just like the humans again, we want to make sure that people are doing good work, right? Not making shortcuts and that they are showing up every single day in ways that allows them to contribute and drive impact. And I think if you're going to create quality teams, you need to think about the backgrounds of those teams. You need to think about the skills that people have, what they're bringing to the table, what are the things that they're challenging you on to make you think about something differently or innovatively. Because for me, it's not enough just to have a team that pumps out something. It's got to be good something. And oftentimes in organizations, if we're pushing people and saying, hey, we want things done fast, quality often suffers, right? In that sense.
Yeah. So, as we officially had to wrap up now, because I wanted to make sure we touched on that, because I guarantee you it's something you talk about on the Office Hours Black Girl
Mhm.
podcast, probably. What are some of the things that you cover on your podcast? What are some of the folks you've talked to? What can people expect when we send them over there to listen once they're done with this episode?
Yeah. So Office Hours Black Girl Podcast is a community dedicated to centering just Black women's stories and experiences in the workplace. So we talk a lot about the intersectionalities of who we are as women, but also as Black women and what that looks like as it relates to leadership, career advancement, how we show up in the workplace, our identities. But also, we've been exploring this idea of entrepreneurship. And you mentioned at the top of the call, I've been spending a lot of time talking to people who are in the season right now of kind of being pushed out, let go, and they're trying to figure out what's next for them. But we want it to be a space that allows people to get really real and authentic, almost like in office hours. It's one on one with, like, an academic. But also really learn from each other and share resources. So we're on season 3. We actually just finished season 3. We actually just got picked up by a distributor. So I'm very excited about that because I think we'll be able to share more of our messaging, but it's really a space that's meant to just help us continue to thrive and share amongst one another and build community around those shared experiences.
Awesome. So we will make sure we're going to tag that. It can be found on any of your streaming services. I stumble on a lot of them on LinkedIn, the little clips that you put up
Yeah.
there, Alana. So how can people find you, reach you, learn more about Untold Impact, or
Hmm.
potentially work with you? If this is something they're like, this is the fresh voice I would like coming in to
Yeah.
engage with, how do they do that?
I am very, very active on LinkedIn. So Alana, Alana, and last name is Cheeks hyphen Lomax on LinkedIn. That's the best way to find me. I also just recently released a personal website, AlanaCheeks-Lomax.com, that has links to Untold Impact, my podcast, and how to reach out to me for speaking engagements or just any other projects. And then I'm also pretty active on social media. So at Cheeks-Lomax on Instagram, you can find me. I post a lot of podcast stuff and just articles and think pieces. So lots of different ways to find me on these webs out here.
And I love that. And it's fun because, you get a little of you and you get a
Hmm.
little bit of the professional side and that
Yeah,
academic side. And it is the beautiful part of technology these days that it all kind of comes together and tells this really beautiful
together.
story about
Yeah.
things.
Hmm.
All right. Final thoughts. I want to
Hmm.
know from you, what's the biggest leadership norm that if you had the power to undo it today and just say, we're not going to expect this anymore when it comes to business and leadership, what would it be?
The biggest leadership norm that we got to get rid of. Oh, Natalie, I'm stumped on this one. Okay, the biggest leadership. What are leaders doing that I do not like? Um, you know what? I think leaders aren't doing enough of holding themselves accountable. I think one of
Oh.
the challenging things as a leader is that we think we have to have it right all the time. And we're humans. It's okay for us not to have it right. It's okay for us to get it wrong. And I think a lot of people are afraid of making mistakes. And because they're afraid of making mistakes, if they do make a mistake, it's hard for them to hold themselves accountable and hold the mirror, and often are maybe pushing the buck to other places. So I want people to realize it's okay to be human in that sense, and hopefully the workforce or the work environment they're in supports them in that, and that if they are not perfect, because we none of us can be perfect, that it's okay, but also how do they hold themselves accountable in that?
And if I can add mine to it, it would be
Yeah.
that, and this is going to be funny coming from someone in risk that loves data and wants to analyze everything. I wish
Hmm.
leaders would follow their gut a little bit more. Go with
Yeah.
the person that doesn't have the best resume, but they rocked it when you talk to them.
Hmm.
And that feeling, because I feel like we've dampened the feelings lately, and because we are in crisis, right? We're just like, it just needs to be done. But if we tapped into that intuition a little bit, I think we might see even more beautiful versions of some of the innovation we're trying to push.
I love
So,
that. Yeah. I
yeah.
always say we're drowning in data, but we're like craving insights because we have
Uh-huh.
so much information, but we don't know what to do with it.
Right. Or what to trust or where to
What to
look or
trust. Yeah.
any of that. Well, Alana, thank you so much for coming on
Thank you
and
for having
recording
me.
this. This has been a rapid fire conversation. I know folks are going to come check out your other discussions that you have. They'll find you on those different links and everything that we'll make available in the show notes. So, folks, when you exit out of here, make sure to head down there and check that out. And, Alana, any last parting thoughts for everyone?
Yeah, just thank you so much, Natalie, for creating the space. And, I've been telling this to myself personally the last few days and other people, just all of us just to like keep going. I think it's like really tough and challenging many days. And I think we're living through a lot, but just keep your head up and like one day at a time.
Yeah, don't let the fear hold you back about what
Mm-mm.
we don't even know.
Yeah.
Just trust it to keep up in the path that we're in. So thanks again, and thanks everyone for listening to another episode of Motivation and That, where we've taken a little bit of hot mess and turned it into hopefully what you consider high potential. And we will talk again soon.